Anvil Station hung in the shadow of Tarsh like a coin dropped into a storm. The gas giant filled two-thirds of every viewport on the observation ring, a slow brown and amber murder of clouds, and the cadets who had lived aboard for more than a month stopped seeing it entirely. That was the first thing the academy taught, though it never appeared in any syllabus. You could get used to anything. You could get used to a world the size of a god turning under your feet, and to the 11 species that shared your corridors, and to the fact that any one of them could kill you with a gesture if the treaty ever failed. You got used to it, and then one day something small happened, and you found out exactly how much of your life had been resting on a courtesy. Cadet Second Class Mara Sunday was 19 years old, and on the morning it happened she was thinking about breakfast. She was not remarkable to look at, and she had spent a fair amount of effort making sure of that. She was of middle height for a human woman, which in the Concord Combined Academy meant she came up to the sternum of a V-Harn and the knee of a Dothel. Her hair was dark and cut short because long hair was a handle. Her hands were the only thing about her that drew a second glance, and only from people who knew what to look for. Broad across the palm, thick through the wrist, the knuckles flattened and shining faintly where the skin had been rebuilt too many times. She had grown up in a fishing town called Bright Harbor on a colony world called Senate, where the tide came in fast enough to kill you, and the nets weighed more than she did until she was 14. Her Aunt Ruth had run the harbor's clinic, and had also, for 30 years, run the only class in town that mattered, a windowless room over the ice house, where the fishermen's daughters learned what to do when a drunk crewman put a hand on them, and the nearest constable was 4 hours away by boat. Aunt Ruth had one rule that she said at the start of every session, in the same flat voice, like a woman reading a weather report. "You are going to have to live with the person you fight," she would say. "Tomorrow, in the same town, at the same dock. So learn to end it in a way that lets you both go home." Mara had not understood that for years. She had thought it was mercy. It took her a long time to understand it was engineering. She was, on paper, an unexceptional cadet, 9th in her cohort in astrogation, 22nd in fleet logistics. She kept her locker clean, she did not drink, she had a Sethai roommate named Tilda who talked in her sleep in 3 languages, and she had exactly one distinction that appeared nowhere in her file, because the instructors who noticed it had not agreed on how to write it down. She was quiet in the ring. Not quiet as in silent, quiet as in still. Most cadets, when they were put in an unarmed engagement, produced a great deal of motion, flinching, resetting, bouncing, a whole vocabulary of nerves. Mara stood there. She watched your shoulder. She did not appear to be doing anything at all, and then the engagement was over and she was apologizing while she helped you up, and you spent the rest of the afternoon trying to reconstruct exactly what had happened to your elbow. Chief Instructor Bakari Endoy had written in her second-term evaluation, "economical." He had considered writing more. He had decided, on reflection, that he did not want to draw attention to her, and had left it at that. He would think about that decision for a long time afterward. Humans had been in the Concord for 6 years. That was not a long time. The V-Harn had been in it for 900, the Sethai for 400, the Dothel for so long that their own histories no longer bothered to mention the joining. 6 years was an eye blink. 6 years meant that half the officers on Anvil Station had been commissioned before anyone had ever heard the word *human*, and had then been informed by treaty that these newcomers were to be trained alongside their own children and addressed as equals. Most of them managed. The Concord was, on the whole, a functional and unglamorous machine, and it had absorbed stranger things than a species of bipedal omnivores from a wet planet. But not all of them managed, and of the ones who did not manage, none managed less gracefully than Sub-Instructor Oren Seval. The V-Harn were tall. That was the first thing anyone noticed, and it was the least interesting thing about them. They stood well over 2 meters, narrow through the hips, deep through the chest, with a fused crest of pale bone running from the brow back over the skull, and along the outer edge of each forearm from elbow to wrist, a ridge of the same material, thickened and honed by nature into a blade that was not a metaphor. A Viharn's forearm was a weapon that had been growing since birth. They called it the spur. They did not think of it as a weapon any more than a human thinks of a fist as a weapon, which is to say they thought of it that way constantly and pretended otherwise. And because of the spur, the Viharn had built, over 900 years, the most elaborate dueling law in the known galaxy. Every cadet at the academy had to learn it, in a 2-week module in first year, and every cadet complained about the 2 weeks and then never forgot a word of it. The law was called *Thalkur*, and its central pillar was so simple that it was almost insulting to teach it. You must declare. Before a Viharn raised a spur against another thinking being, the Viharn had to say so, out loud, in the open, with witnesses if witnesses were present. There was a form of words, and the form of words was old and ugly, and had been polished by centuries of use into something that sounded almost tender. I set my name against yours. And then the other party could accept, or decline, or name a champion, or ask for a delay, or spit. And every one of those responses had a procedure attached to it, and the procedures filled 7 volumes. The reason for the law was written on the first page of the first volume, and it was not philosophy. It was arithmetic. A species born with blades on its arms and a temper on a hair trigger had, in its second millennium of recorded history, very nearly finished itself. The declaration was not a courtesy. It was a tourniquet. It was the 2 seconds of speech that had been surgically inserted between a Viharn's anger and a Viharn's arm, and those 2 seconds were the only reason there were any Viharn left at all. And a blow struck without declaration had a name too. Keshthal, the unspoken stroke, the coward's stroke. There was no rehabilitation for it in Viharn law, no penance, no diminished responsibility. A Viharn who struck without declaring had not committed a crime of violence. He had committed a crime against the thing that kept his species alive, and the punishment was not death. The Viharn were not barbarians, but erasure. The name came off the house rolls. The crest was ground flat. You were permitted to continue existing. You were simply no longer anyone. Cadets memorized this in first year, and they thought of it as folklore, the way a child thinks of the rules for a game that nobody plays anymore. Oren Seval had grown up inside that law the way a fish grows up inside water, and he had also grown up as the 4th son of the House of Seval, whose crest had been on the Concord's founding charter, and who had been informed since he was old enough to hold a spoon that his blood was the reason the galaxy had not eaten itself. He was 31 in human years. He was an adjunct instructor of close engagement, which was not a prestigious posting, and he knew that it was not, and he had convinced himself that this was because the academy had been diluted. He had a good voice. He was genuinely, measurably excellent at his subject. And he had discovered, somewhere in his 2nd year of teaching, a small and very safe pleasure. He liked to break human cadets in the ring. Not physically. He was far too careful for that. He liked to take them apart in front of their classmates, within the rules, with the timer running and the safeties on, to let a 19-year-old commit to a strike and then simply not be there, and then to hold them immobile with 2 fingers for as long as it took the laughter to start. Then he would let them go, and he would say something generous. He was always generous afterward. That was the part he enjoyed most, and it was the part that no board of inquiry would ever have been able to charge him with. Chief Instructor Endoy had spoken to the Commandant about it twice. Both times the answer had been the same, delivered without warmth and without apology. Bring me a rule he has broken. The thing began, as these things do, over nothing. It was a Tuesday, in the sense that the station kept a 24-hour cycle out of deference to a human convention that the Viharn found faintly comic. Ring 3, the close engagement hall, at 6:40. 22 cadets in gray, barefoot on the sprung deck. the air smelling of antiseptic and old sweat, and the peculiar dry lightning tang that the V-Harn gave off when they were pleased. Oren was running the Falls and Recoveries block. He had called out Cadet Dov Carrick, a big human from the Titan yards, broad as a door and about as fast, and he had put him down 4 times in 90 seconds, and each time he had gotten a bigger laugh. Then he had asked, pleasantly, whether any of the human cadets could explain the failure. Nobody spoke. That was the correct response, and every human in the room knew it. You did not answer that question, because there was no answer to it that did not end with you on the deck. Mara Sunday answered it. Later, in 3 separate interviews, she would be asked why, and she would say she did not know, and this would be recorded as evasion. It was not evasion. She genuinely did not know. She had watched Dov go down 4 times, and she had watched the shape of his shoulder each time, and something in her that had been trained over the ice house in Bright Harbor by a woman with cold hands had simply opened her mouth. "He's reaching," she said. "Sir, he's reaching for you because you're letting him. You give him the arm and then you take it back a hand's width every time and he follows it. He's not failing, he's being fished." The room went very still. It was, she realized about a half-second too late, an accurate observation. That was the problem. If she had said something stupid, he would have laughed and it would have been over. If she had said something insubordinate, he would have put her on report and it would have been over. She had told 22 cadets exactly how their instructor did his trick. Oren Seval stood in the middle of the ring with his hands loose at his sides, and he looked at her for 4 full seconds, and then he smiled, the V-Harn smile, the slight backward tilt of the crest. "Cadet Sunday," he said, "step out." She stepped out onto the deck. "Show them." "Sir, you have described a method. Method is theory. Theory is what your people bring to this academy in place of ability." He spread his hands, generous, expansive, and the class laughed because the class always laughed. "So, come and do to me what you say I did to Carrick. Fish me." And Mara Sunday said the thing that ended it. "No, sir." The laughter stopped. She had not meant it as defiance. She would spend a very long time trying to explain this to people who did not want to hear it. She had meant it as arithmetic. She had looked at the situation, the ring, the class, the timer, the man 3 heads taller than her with a bone blade on each arm and a reputation to feed, and she had run it the way Aunt Ruth had taught her to run it, and she had arrived at the only sane answer. Do not fight a man who has nothing to lose in front of an audience he needs. "No, sir," she said again quietly into the silence. "I'd rather not, sir. It wouldn't teach them anything." There is a particular sound a room makes when 30 lungs stop at once. Oren Seval did not move for a moment. And in that moment, something happened behind his eyes that a V-Harn physician would later describe, at the inquiry, with clinical precision. The crest capillaries flooding, the second eyelid retracting, the whole cascade of a nervous system 900 years of law had been built to interrupt. He had been refused, not beaten, refused, in front of 22 cadets by a human girl who came up to his chest, who had just declined to fight him on the grounds that fighting him would be a waste of everyone's mourning. And in the 2 seconds that his ancestors had built into him, the 2 seconds in which he was supposed to say 6 old, ugly, tender words, "I set my name against yours," he did not say them. He crossed the mat. It was 3 long strides, and it was not the movement of a man beginning an exercise. Every witness agreed on this afterward, including the ones who had every reason not to. He was not walking toward a student. He had dropped his weight into his hips. His left arm had come across his body in the guard the V-Harn call the asterisk closed gate asterisk, and his right had drawn back and up so that the spur, pale, ridged, 22 centimeters of honed bone, still capped in its training sheath, though the sheath weighed 1,100 grams and would break a human sternum like a cracker, came over his shoulder in the arc that his people had been perfecting since before Rome. He did not declare. He did not slow. He was 3 meters from her, then 2, then 1, and the sound in the hall was the sound of a very large body moving very fast across a sprung floor, and Cadet Tilda of the Sethi, standing at the back rank, opened all 4 of her hands and made a noise that had no translation. And Mara Sunday, 19 years old, of Bright Harbor on the world of Senate, watched his shoulder. Not his eyes, not the spur, not the crest or the hips or the terrible closing distance. She watched the small bony knot at the front of his right shoulder, the way a woman had taught her in a room over an ice house 11 light years away, and she saw it drop and rotate, and she knew, in the way that you know a thing you have done 10,000 times, exactly where the arc was going to go, and exactly when, and exactly what it was going to cost him to send it there. She did not step back. She stepped in. The station's hall optics ran at 400 frames a second because the Academy had been sued once, a long time ago, by a family who claimed their son had been dropped on his head. Every ring in every hall had been wired ever since. The recording from Ring 3, Camera 4, on that Tuesday morning would eventually be watched, frame by frame, by more beings than any other 2 seconds of footage in the history of the Concord. It lasted, from the moment Oren Seval's foot left the mark to the moment he stopped moving, 1.9 seconds. Here is what happened in it. At the instant the spur began its arc, an arc that would take 410 milliseconds to arrive, Mara Sunday moved forward and to her left asterisk inside the swing, toward the man, into the one place on the whole mat where the weapon could not reach because the weapon had already committed to arriving somewhere else. It was not a dodge. A dodge is what you do when you are trying to be elsewhere. She was not trying to be elsewhere. She was trying to be closer. She got closer. She got so close that the descending forearm passed behind her right shoulder and the wind of it stirred the hair at the back of her neck. And for 1/100th of a second the 2 of them were chest to sternum, and the frame that captured this would be printed on posters, on recruitment vids, on the walls of dormitories on 9 worlds, and she would come to hate it more than she had ever hated anything. Then she took the arm. Her left hand went to his wrist, not gripping, hooking, the thumb tucked flat, the way you never grip a thing that is stronger than you. Her right forearm came up under his triceps, above the elbow, inside the joint, and she did not pull. That was the part that nobody watching in real time could understand, the part that made every combat instructor in the Concord run the footage again, with the speed dropped to 1/10. She did not pull, she turned asterisk. She turned her hips the way a woman hauls a net over a gunwale, dropping her weight and rotating her whole body around a line that ran down through her own spine into the deck, and the arm that Oren Seval had launched at her head, carrying all of his mass, all of his acceleration, all of the beautiful, murderous momentum of a species built for exactly this, went with her because it had nowhere else to be. He had given her everything. That was the thing. He had given her 130 kilos moving at speed, and all she had done was decline to be in front of it and offer it a direction instead. His feet left the deck. Not far, 20 centimeters maybe, long enough to be entirely, irrecoverably hers. And then the world's oldest, simplest lesson, the one that every human child learns falling off a bicycle and that no Viharn had ever had cause to learn at all. The deck is very large and it does not move. He landed on his chest and the flat of his shoulder, and the sound was not dramatic. It was a slap. It was the sound of a wet coat dropped on a floor. It filled the entire hall. And Mara Sunday went down with him. That detail was the one chief instructor Endoy would point to years later when he taught this footage to new cadets, and he would stop the frame right there and let them sit with it. She goes down with him. She did not throw and step back. She did not release and posture. She rode him to the deck, and her knee found the space between his shoulder blades and settled there, 60 kilos of weight concentrated into a point on the strongest part of him, and her hands did three things in the space of half a second, which was the entire art of her, condensed. The left hand kept the wrist rolled outward, so that the spur, that magnificent, honed, 22-centimeter argument was turned up and away, pointing at the ceiling lights, at nothing, at no one. Useless. A blade is only a blade if it is aimed. The right hand slid up and caught the base of his crest, not to strike it, not to grind it, but to hold his head still against the mat with the heel of her palm, because a Viharn who cannot lift his head cannot bring his weight under him, and a Viharn who cannot bring his weight under him is a very large amount of biology with nowhere to go. And then she froze. That was the last thing. That was the thing that the frame-by-frame showed, and that no one who had watched it in the room had seen at all. At 1.9 seconds, Mara Sunday stopped moving entirely. Every muscle in her went to a kind of loaded stillness, the stillness of a hand on a valve, and she stayed exactly like that. She did not hit him. She had 100 openings. She was a human being kneeling on the back of a man who had just tried to take her head off, with his arm locked and his crest pinned, and his throat exposed and 30 witnesses to say it was justified. And she did not hit him. And she did not tighten the arm the extra 8 degrees that would have popped the shoulder out of the socket like a cork. And she did not do any of the 11 other things that Aunt Ruth had taught her over the ice house and had made her promise on her 14th birthday. Never to do unless the boat was already sinking. She held. That was all. She held him there on the sprung deck of Ring 3, and the timer on the wall kept counting, and Cadet Dov Carrick was still half on his knees where he had been dropped for the 4th time, staring, and Cadet Tilda had all 4 hands over her face, and 22 cadets stood in dead silence, and watched a human girl hold a Viharn officer immobile with an economy of motion that looked, from where they were standing, almost like an act of kindness. Oren Seval made one attempt to rise. She let him. That was the other thing on the recording, and the board would ask her about it 4 times because it made no sense to them. She let him get an elbow under himself. She let him load his legs. She let him gather every gram of the strength that had never in his life failed to be enough. And then she moved her hips about 4 centimeters, and shifted the angle of the wrist perhaps 10 degrees, and all of that strength went straight down into the deck and did nothing at all, and he settled back onto his chest with a sound that was not a word in any language. He tried once, he understood, he stopped. 2.6 seconds after he had left his mark, the fight was over, and it had been over for 0.7 of a second already. Myra held him for 11 more. Then she said, into the roaring silence, in a perfectly ordinary voice, a voice that would be transcribed and translated and argued over and eventually carved into the lintel of a building. "I'm going to let you up now, sir. Please don't." And she let him up. She stood and stepped back and put her hands at her sides, and she was breathing hard. You could see that, on the recording. Her chest was going like a bellows and her hands had begun to shake, because she was 19 and adrenaline is adrenaline in every species that has it. Oren Seval got to his feet. He got up the way a building comes back from an earthquake. He rose, and he set his shoulders, and he turned to face her, and the entire hall stopped breathing again, because there was one obvious thing left for him to do, and every being in that room could feel the shape of it in the air. And Mara Sunday looked up at him, up, a long way up, and did not move, and did not raise her hands, and simply waited. That was the frame they should have printed. Endoy always said so. Not the collision, not the throw. That asterisk one, a 19-year-old standing flat-footed and open-handed in front of a furious 2-meter apex predator with blood in his crest, waiting to see whether he was going to be a person. He was not quite, but he was close enough. Oren Seval turned his head slowly and looked at the class. And in the back rank, Cadet Very Osh of the House of Osh, 17 years old, the youngest Viharn in the cohort, said one word out loud. She did not mean to. She would testify to that, weeping, 3 weeks later. It came out of her the way a name comes out of you when you see someone fall. Kesh thou. The word went across that room like a crack across ice. Every V-Harn in the hall there were 5 turned to look at their instructor. Not at Mara. Not at the girl who had just put an officer on the deck in under 2 seconds. At him. And in the space of a single indrawn breath, every human in the room understood, without knowing a word of the language, that something had just happened that was far, far larger than a fight. Oren Seval walked out of Ring 3 without speaking. The door cycled shut behind him, and Mara Sunday stood in the middle of the mat with her hands shaking and looked around at 22 faces, and discovered that not one of them would meet her eyes. Station security took 11 minutes to arrive, which was, in the circumstances, quite fast. They found the class exactly where it had been left, because nobody had known what else to do. Nobody had dismissed them. Nobody had the authority. 22 cadets had simply stood on the mat for 11 minutes in a room with the timer still running, and the V-Harn among them had stood a little apart, and the humans had stood a little apart from the V-Harn, and Cadet Tilda had gone and sat down beside Mara on the edge of the mat and put one soft hand on her wrist, and that was the only thing anybody had said. The senior security officer was a Dothel named Provost Huron, who massed 400 kilos and had been doing this for 60 years, and had learned to walk into a room and read it before he said a word. He read this one in about 4 seconds. "Which of you is Sunday?" he said. She stood up, "Sir." He looked at her. He looked at the recording tag on the wall, and the little green light that meant camera 4 had been running the whole time, and something in the great slabbed architecture of his face relaxed by perhaps 1 degree. "Are you injured, Cadet?" "No, sir." "Did you strike Sub-Instructor Seval?" She thought about it. She actually thought about it, and Huron watched her think, and he made a note about that too. "No, sir," she said. "I don't believe so. I took his arm and I used his own weight to put him down, and then I held him. I let him up when he stopped. I don't think anything I did would count as a strike, but I'm not, sir. I don't know how you'd score it." "Nobody does," said Provost Huron. "That's why we have boards." He turned his enormous head. "This hall is closed. All cadets are confined to quarters pending statements. Nobody talks to anybody. And Cadet." "Sir." "Do not," he said, "say one single word about this to another living being until you have said it to me first. Not to your roommate, not to your instructors, not to your mother. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir." "Good." He looked at her for a moment longer, and then, unexpectedly, at the mat where the shape of a V-Harn's body had left a long crease in the surface. 19 years old, he said to nobody and walked out. The trouble, of course, was that 11 minutes is a very long time. By the time Provost Huron sealed Ring 3, 4 cadets had already sent messages, because they were 19 and 20 and 22, and their hands had moved before their judgment did. 3 of those messages were text, 1 of them was not. Cadet Dov Carrick, who had been on his knees 10 meters away with a perfect line of sight, and whose personal recorder had been running because he had been trying to study his own falls, had a clip. 400 frames a second, 2.6 seconds. And Dov Carrick, who had been humiliated in front of his classmates 4 times in 90 seconds by a man he had come to hate with a pure and adolescent completeness, did not think about the treaty or the board or the fact that he was ruining a life. He thought, they have to see this. He sent it to his brother on Titan. By 900 station time, it was on the Academy's internal boards. By 1400, it was on Tarsh Relay. By the end of the week, it had been viewed 11 billion times, and the Concord, a 900-year-old civilization of 11 species and 4,000 worlds, a civilization that had absorbed plagues, secessions, and 2 wars it did not talk about, discovered that it could not stop watching a small human woman decline, very politely, to be killed. They kept her in a white room for 6 hours. It was not a cell. It was a debriefing suite, and there was tea, and a HFY counselor came twice and asked, in her careful, whistling standard, whether Cadet Sunday would like to talk about her feelings. Cadet Sunday said no, thank you, ma'am. She sat with her hands flat on the table because that was the only way to keep them still, and she looked at the wall, and she went through it again. Did she have to? That was the question. Not was she right, she was too tired for that one. Just, did she have to? Could she have gone backward instead of forward? No, the arc was already coming and backward was where the arc was going. Could she have slipped it and run? Maybe. Maybe. And then he would have turned and he would have come again, and the second time he would not have been surprised. Could she have hurt him less? She turned that one over for a long time, and she could not find a way. She had used the smallest amount of him that would do the job. She had used his own weight and the deck, and 11 seconds of patience. There was no gentler version, she had checked. Could she have hurt him more? That question came and sat down in the room with her, uninvited, and she found that her face was hot, and she pressed her hands flatter on the table. Yes, enormously more. That was the truth of it, and she was going to have to carry that truth around for the rest of her life. For about 4/10 of a second, kneeling on the back of a man who had tried to open her skull, she had had his entire body in her hands like a wrench in a socket, and she had known, with a clarity that frightened her far more than the spur ever had, exactly how much of him she could take apart, and in what order. And she had not. Aunt Ruth over the ice house, cold hands, flat voice. You are going to have to live with the person you fight. Mara Sunday put her head down on the table in the white room, and did not cry, and waited for them to come and tell her what she had. Commandant Severin Adha had been in command of Anvil Station for 19 years. She was Viharn, and she was old enough that her crest had gone the color of a dry riverbed, old enough that the spurs on her forearms had been ceremonially blunted at the age of 60, because a Viharn officer past a certain rank is expected to be past a certain temper. She had commanded a picket line in a war that the Concord's histories described as a border adjustment, and she had come home from it with a limp and a habit of very long silences, and she had not raised her voice in 19 years, and nobody on Anvil Station had ever needed her to. She watched the recording 11 times. She watched it alone in her office with the lights down and Tarsh burning brown and gold in the viewport behind her, and she did not touch the tea that had gone cold at her elbow. She watched it at full speed. She watched it at 1/10. She watched the 2 seconds of an officer of her academy, a son of the House of Seval, whose crest was on the charter, crossing 3 meters of mat toward a 19-year-old with his arm cocked and no word in his mouth. And on the 11th viewing she stopped it at the frame just before impact, and she sat looking at the girl's face. There was no fear in it. That was the thing that Severin Adha could not get past. She had seen fear in every species the Concord contained. She had seen it in her own crew, in her own mirror. There was none here. There was only a terrible, focused, workmanlike attention asterisk, the expression of a technician who has been handed a failing system and has already found the valve. The commandant of Anvil Station leaned back in her chair in the dark and said one sentence out loud in her own language to nobody. It did not translate well. The closest standard rendering of what she said was, "We have been teaching them the wrong things." The Board of Inquiry convened 9 days later. They convened it fast and they convened it wide, and both of those decisions were Severin Adha's. She could have kept it in-house. She could have handled it as an instructional conduct matter, disciplined Oren quietly, transferred him to a survey station in the fringe, and let the recording burn itself out on the relays the way scandals do. 3 separate people advised her to do exactly that, including the Concord's own deputy legate for cultural affairs, who called her personally and used the word *inflammatory* 9 times in 6 minutes. She convened a full board instead. 5 members, 3 species, public transcript, sworn testimony, and a station-wide feed. "You are going to make it worse," the deputy legate said. "It is already as bad as it can be," said Commandant Adha. "What I am going to make is a asterisk record." Sub-instructor Oren Seval came before the board on the second day, and he lied. He did not lie badly. That was the thing that Mara, sitting in the gallery in a dress uniform that itched, found most difficult to watch. He was calm and he was fluent and he was very nearly convincing, and he had had 9 days to build it, and what he had built was almost good. He said it had been an instructional demonstration. He said that Cadet Sunday had made an assertion about his method in front of the class, that he had invited her to demonstrate her assertion, that she had accepted, and that he had initiated a standard closing sequence at training speed with the spur sheathed, as he had done 4 times that same morning with Cadet Carrick, and that the cadet, being inexperienced, had responded with a technique of unexpected efficacy, and that he had gone to the deck. He said with a small and beautifully judged rueful tilt of the crest that he had been surprised, that he had underestimated her, that he was, in fact, impressed. He said that the entire matter was being inflated by parties with an interest in inflaming species relations, and that he bore Cadet Sunday no ill will whatsoever, and that he would be honored to have her in his class again. And then he said the sentence that killed him, and he said it easily, the way you say a thing you have practiced in a mirror. There was no need for declaration because there was no duel. It was a lesson. The board recessed for 2 hours. When they came back, the Viharn member of the board, a fleet advocate named Kel Dorem, who had spent 30 years prosecuting *Thalkur violations in the Viharn home courts, and who had come out of retirement for this, asked to be allowed to conduct the examination personally. He did it in 11 minutes. It was the most thorough destruction of another living being that Mara Sunday had ever witnessed, and not one word of it was raised above a conversational tone. He did not begin with the fight. He began with the recording of the class from 20 minutes earlier, and he walked Oren Seval through his own instruction, sentence by sentence. "Here, sub-instructor, you tell the cadets that the closing sequence must never be performed above 2/3 speed in a teaching hall. Do you recall saying that? Read it aloud, please. Louder." Then the timestamps. Camera 400 frames per second. Distance covered 3.1 meters. Elapsed 640 milliseconds. That is not 2/3 speed, sub-instructor. It is not full speed. Our physicians have measured it. It is the fastest movement recorded on this station by any Viharn in 9 years. And you will now explain to this board how a man moves faster in a teaching demonstration than he has ever moved in his life. Then the sheath. The training sheath weighs 1,100 grams. It is designed to prevent laceration. It is not designed to prevent fracture. You know this because you taught it in this hall in the module on safety equipment on the 14th of last month. Read the passage aloud. Louder, please. Then the arc. Advocate Dorem brought up the frame, the spur at the top of its travel, and he left it on the screen for a long time, and he said nothing at all, and he let the entire Concord look at where it was pointed. Not the shoulder, not the ribs, not the arm, the leg, the padded torso, any of the 12 legal contact zones that Oren Seval himself had chalked on a board in that room a month before. "The temple." "Sub-instructor Seval," said Advocate Dorem at last, in the mildest voice in the room, "you have told this board that there was no need for declaration because there was no duel." "That is correct." "Then I must ask you a question, and I ask it as a Viharn, and I ask you to answer me as a Viharn." He leaned forward. "If it was not a duel, what was it?" The silence went on for a long time. Because there were only 2 answers. If it was a duel, he had struck without declaring, and that was *Keshthal*, and that was the end of him. And if it was not a duel, if it was, as he had sworn, simply a large male crossing a room at the fastest speed of his life to bring a weighted bone blade down onto the unprotected skull of a 19-year-old girl who had said the word asterisk, no asterisk to him in front of witnesses, then it was not Keshthal asterisk. It was assault, attempted killing of a subordinate under instruction, and that was not a matter for the Viharn home courts and their 7 volumes of honor. That was a matter for the Concord's criminal code, which had no poetry in it at all. Orun Seval looked at Advocate Doram for a long moment. And then, because he had been raised inside that law the way a fish is raised inside water, and because a part of him had been screaming for 9 days, he made a choice. It was a duel, he said. And there it was. Advocate Doram sat back and folded his hands. Then you struck without declaration, he said. Thank you, sub-instructor, I have nothing further. 9 days. That was all it took. 9 days from a single stroke to a man taking apart his own life on a public feed in front of 11 billion witnesses. And the terrible thing, the thing that Mara could not stop thinking about, lying awake in her bunk while Tilda muttered in 3 languages above her, was that every one of those 9 days had been asterisk his asterisk. Nobody had trapped him. Nobody had tricked him. He had been given every opportunity to say the simple, ruinous, survivable truth. I lost my temper. I am ashamed. He would have been dismissed. He would have gone home. He would have been a man who had done a bad thing. Instead, he had reached for a story, and the story had needed another story to hold it up, and that one had needed another, and the whole structure had come down on him in 9 days with a speed that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with arithmetic. She had put him on the deck in 1.9 seconds. He was destroying himself considerably faster than that. They came to her on the 4th night. Not Orun. Orun was confined to quarters and would not, in fact, speak to her again for a very long time. It was his family. The House of Seval sent a woman named Tess, who was not a lawyer and did not describe herself as one, and who met Mara in a briefing room on the administrative ring at 2100, with 2 cups of something warm and an expression of enormous, sincere sympathy. Tess was very good. She did not offer money. She was much too skilled for that, and money would have been an insult and an evidentiary catastrophe. What she offered was a asterisk reading. You are being used, Cadet Sunday, she said. You understand that? Ma'am. The recording is being played on 900 human worlds, with a caption that says this is what we are. It is being played on Viharn worlds with a caption that says this is what they will do to us asterisk. In 4 days there has been a riot on Perrin Station, and a Viharn dockworker has lost an eye. Did you know that? Mara had not known that. You did not do that, said Tess gently, but it is being done with you. She turned her cup a little on the table. There is a version of this in which the board finds that a hot-tempered instructor and a gifted student engaged in an asterisk unauthorized bout. Mutual. Regrettable. Both at fault, both reprimanded, both, and I want you to hear this word, Cadet, both asterisk finished with it. He goes to a survey post. You go on with your career, and in 6 months you are a cadet again instead of a symbol. The riots stop. The dockworker keeps his other eye. And what do I have to do, ma'am? Say that you accepted, said Tess. That is all. Say that when he invited you to demonstrate, you agreed, and that you both understood a bout was beginning. She smiled, and it was a kind smile, and there was nothing in it that was not true. You will not be lying about the fight. Every frame of the fight is exactly as it is. You will only be adjusting one small thing that happened before it. And Mara Sunday sat in that room and understood, with great clarity, that she was being offered the way out. It was a real one. That was what made it so heavy. Tess had not lied to her about a single thing. The riots were real. The dockworker was real. In 6 months she could be nobody again. She wanted that so badly that her throat ached, and all it would cost was a sentence about 2 seconds that nobody had recorded anyway, 2 seconds in which a man had failed to speak. She sat with it for a long time. Tess did not rush her. That was the mark of a professional. "Ma'am," Mara said finally, "may I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why does your law say he has to declare?" Tess blinked. "I beg your pardon." "The declaration. I did the module in first year. I know what it is asterisk. I'm asking why." Mara looked up. "Because it's not about fairness, is it? It's not so the other person can get ready. Half the procedures in the code make it asterisk harder for the challenged party. It's not for them at all." She turned her own cup once the way Tess had. "It's for him. It's 2 seconds where he has to hear his own voice saying what he's about to do. That's the whole thing, isn't it? That's the entire law. It's 2 seconds of asterisk hearing yourself." Tess of the House of Seville said nothing. "He didn't have those 2 seconds," said Mara, "and I've been trying for 9 days to work out why I'm not angry at him, and I think that's why. He didn't decide to kill me, ma'am. He just didn't stop. And your people built a whole civilization out of the space where the stopping goes, and he stepped over it, and everybody in that room heard it happen." She swallowed. "If I say I accepted, then that space closes up like it was never there. And the next one won't have to stop either." She stood up. Her hands were shaking again, and she put them behind her back. "I'm sorry about the dockworker," she said. "I'm sorry about all of it. Tell them no, ma'am." The clip had, by then, become a kind of weather. It played on the mess hall screens until the commandant had the mess hall screens turned off. It was set to music. It was set to 9 different pieces of music. There was a version slowed to 60 seconds with a rising choir. There was a version cut to end at the throw, which she hated, and a version cut to end at the asterisk hold asterisk, which she hated more, because someone had captioned it in enormous letters, "Hold the line." Somebody made a stencil of the frame, the collision frame, the chest-to-sternum frame, and by the 3rd week it was on a wall on Perrin Station, and a fuel silo on Titan, and a bulkhead 2 decks below her own quarters. And under it, always in the same crude hand, the same 3 words. "We don't miss." Mara stood in front of that one for 11 minutes, at 400, in her sleep clothes, on her way back from the head. And then she went and found a maintenance locker and a scraper, and she took it off the bulkhead herself, and she was still working on it when the watch found her at 5:30 with her knuckles bleeding and her jaw set. They wrote her up for defacing station property. She did not contest it. She took the demerits, and she never told anyone why, and Chief Instructor N. Doy, who read the incident report, and who had been teaching young people for 31 years, and who knew exactly what he was looking at, went back to his quarters and sat down heavily and put his face in his hands. Because he could see what was coming for her, and it was not Oren Seval. It was the 11. A man in free fall will reach for anything. That is not cowardice. It is reflex, and it is the same reflex in every species that has ever evolved a hand. The trouble is that in a fall of this particular kind, everything a man reaches for comes away in his grip, and the reaching itself is what turns a fall into an acceleration. Oren Seval reached 3 times. The first was the clip. 11 days after the board's 2nd session, a version of the recording appeared on a Vharn language feed on the Seval homeworld. It was, in every visible respect, the same footage. It had the same timestamp, the same camera tag, the same grain. It was 412 milliseconds shorter. The missing frames were at the beginning. In the edited version, the sequence opened with Sub-Instructor Seval already in motion, mid-stride, arm rising, and a viewer who did not know better would see a man who had been given a Q asterisk. There was no ambiguity in what was gone. It was the moment in which Mara Sunday said no, Sir asterisk, and the moment in which a Vharn officer stood absolutely still with a decision in his mouth and did not make it. Cut those 400 milliseconds, and the whole thing became about that started badly. The feed had 80 million subscribers. It ran the clip for 9 hours. And then a 19-year-old Viharn student at a technical college on the second moon, a person whose name nobody remembers and who never gave interviews, pulled both versions, laid them side by side, and posted the difference with no commentary at all. The Concord's forensic office had the metadata inside a day. The edit had been made on Anvil Station. It had been made on an Academy terminal. It had been made on Oren Seval's own credentials, because he had been confined to quarters for 11 days with nothing but a terminal and a rage, and because it had not occurred to him, genuinely had not occurred to him, that anyone would check. That was the thing about him that Mara eventually understood, and that made her, unexpectedly, sad. He was not stupid. He was simply a man who had lived his entire life in a place where nobody checked. Evidence tampering in the middle of a board of inquiry is not a nuance. It is a category. It converted the entire proceeding from a question about his temper into a question about his character, and it did so in a single afternoon. The second reach was the challenge. He filed it 17 days in. A formal instrument of *Thalcur*, drawn up correctly, in the old form, with the House seal and the 6 words, addressed by name to Cadet 2nd Class Mara Sunday of Senate, and lodged with the board as a request for the matter to be resolved in the ring under Viharn law. He must have thought it was brilliant. Mara could see the shape of the logic even from the outside, and she had to admit it had a certain terrible elegance. If she accepted, he got a second fight, a * declared *1, and this time he would not underestimate her, and win or lose, the record would show a duel, and a duel meant a declaration, and a declaration meant he was not a coward, and everything he had lost could be argued back. And if she declined, a human, hiding behind Concord law, refusing an honorable challenge, then the story would turn. Then he was the wronged man. He had built a door with 2 exits and put her in front of it. He had forgotten what room he was standing in. Advocate Kel Dorem read the challenge aloud to the board, in the old form, in the old language, with the House seal projected on the wall behind him. And then he set it down and said, in the same conversational voice, "Members of the board, the instrument before you is a declaration of *Thalcur*, correctly formed, against Cadet Sunday, arising from the events of the 14th. Its filing is an assertion, on the record under seal, that as of this date the sub-instructor considers a state of unresolved challenge to exist between himself and this cadet, a state which, under the code, is created by declaration, and by nothing else." He turned to look at Oren. "Sub-instructor, on the 14th of last month did you declare?" The transcript records a pause of 11 seconds. "No," said Oren Seval. "Then on the 14th of last month there was no challenge?" "No." "And you struck her anyway?" "Silence." "You have just told this board," said Dorem, "in your own hand, under your own seal, in the words of our own law, that you know precisely how a challenge is made, and that you did not make one. Sub-instructor, I am obliged to inform you that you have filed your own conviction." He had reached, and it had come away in his hand. The third reach was the smallest and the worst. He tried to have her expelled. There was a regulation, Academy Code, Section 14, Subsection 9, that prohibited a cadet from employing unsanctioned methods of close engagement in a teaching hall. It was an ancient piece of drafting, dating from a period when the Academy had been worried about cadets bringing homeworld techniques into the ring and killing each other by accident. It had not been invoked in 40 years. Oren Seval invoked it. From confinement, through a family advocate, in a 9-page filing that argued that Cadet Sunday's method, that hooking wrist, that turn of the hips, that 11 seconds of patient wait, appeared nowhere in the Academy's approved curriculum, and was therefore, by the plain text of the regulation, unsanctioned, and that she should be dismissed from the service. And the maddening thing, the thing that kept Chief Instructor Endoy awake for 3 nights, was that it was technically correct asterisk. There was no entry in the academy's syllabus for what she had done. Nobody had ever put it there. Human restraint technique. The whole vast, unglamorous, deeply unfashionable human science of taking hold of a violent body and stopping it without ruining it. A science built up over 4,000 years by ambulance crews and constables and midwives and fishermen's aunts, precisely because human beings fight each other constantly and then have to go on sharing a planet, had never been added to the Concord's combat curriculum. Because the Concord had never thought of it as combat. They taught striking. They taught blades and stances and closing sequences. They taught 11 species worth of ways to end a life in a fully accredited 3-year module. And a 19-year-old had used a technique for not ending one, and the regulation book had no name for it. Endoy brought the filing to the commandant himself. He laid it on her desk and stood there, 61 years old, and said, "Ma'am, he's right. And if he's right, then we have been teaching in this building for 900 years without ever once teaching a cadet how to stop." Severin Adha read the filing. Then she said, "How long would it take you to write the module?" Endoy opened his mouth, closed it. "6 weeks, ma'am." "You have 4. None of which helped Mara Sunday, who was, by the 7th week, coming apart. It did not look like coming apart. That was the trouble. She made her formations. She made her marks. Her marks went asterisk up asterisk, in fact, because she had stopped sleeping and had to do something with the hours. She was polite to everyone. She stood very straight. She simply stopped being a person. Nobody would spar with her. That was the first thing, and the strangest. In the hall, when the pairs were called, there would be a small, terrible shuffle, and then Chief Instructor Endoy would put her with a training frame instead, and she would work a machine while 30 of her classmates worked each other, and she would go back to her locker and sit down and look at her hands. The Viharn cadets were the only ones who spoke to her honestly. That was the second strange thing, and it took her a month to understand it. Very Osh, the 17-year-old who had said the word out loud, came and sat down opposite her in the mess one evening with a tray of something purple, and said, without any preamble at all, "They are frightened of you, and it is stupid, and I am going to sit here every day until they stop." "You don't have to do that." "I know," Very ate for a while. "My cohort has a wager. They think you were trained by your military, some secret order, a killing school." Mara looked at her plate. "My aunt," she said, "ran a clinic. She had a room over an ice house, and she taught 14-year-old girls how to get a drunk man off the dock without drowning him. She used to say that anybody can hurt somebody. That's not a skill. That's just an asterisk accident you did on purpose." She turned her fork over. She said the hard thing, the thing that takes 10 years, is putting your hands on somebody who is trying to kill you and deciding how much of them you are going to use. Very Osh set down her utensil. "That is not what my people think you are," she said quietly. "I know. It is not what your people think you are either." Mara did not answer that, because there was nothing to say to it, and because Very was right, and because that was the part that was actually killing her. They had begun to send her things. Not the Viharn, the humans. Letters mostly, routed through the Academy's public inbox and screened by a very tired ensign who eventually gave up and just forwarded the lot. 9,000 in the first month. A colonial militia on a place called Hardrau made her an honorary captain and sent her a hat. A shipping consortium offered her 4 years' pay to appear in an advertisement. 6 separate men proposed marriage. Somebody's grandmother sent her a recording of herself crying and saying, "Thank you, sweetheart, thank you for showing them." Showing them what Mara wanted to write back, she never did. And underneath the letters, in the boards and the feeds and the crude stencils on bulkheads, ran a low, steady current that she could feel in her back teeth. We don't miss. This is what we are. 2 seconds. Human cadets she had never spoken to nodded at her in corridors like conspirators. A first year from Titan called Baron Cade started a fight with a V-Harn cadet in the fuel bay, and when they pulled him off, said that he had done it for her asterisk. She went and found him in confinement and stood on the other side of the door, and could not think of one single thing to say. That was the night it happened. She was on her way back 200 empty corridor, the long curve of the outer ring with Tarsh grinding away behind the viewports, and a maintenance tech came around the bend the other way. A V-Harn, some contractor she had never seen, arms full of conduit. He looked up, he saw her face. And he stopped walking. He took one step backward and put his back against the bulkhead and turned his forearms outward and down, spurs flat to the wall, which is the oldest gesture in V-Harn body language and means I am no threat. I am nothing. Please pass asterisk. A grown man, 50 years old, standing against a wall with his weapons turned away because a 19-year-old girl was coming down the corridor. And something in Mara Sunday's chest, something she had never met before and hoped never to meet again, liked it. It was not a thought. It was warm, and it was fast, and it was gone in less than a second, and it was the single most frightening thing that had happened to her since the mat. She got back to her quarters and she sat down on the floor with her back against the bunk and her hands over her mouth, and Tilda woke up and came down and sat with her, all 4 hands folded, and did not ask, and did not speak, and stayed until 400. The commandant sent for her the next morning. Severin Adha's office was very plain. There was a desk and 2 chairs and a viewport, and on the wall a single flat gray stone about the size of a fist, mounted in a bracket with no label of any kind. "Sit," said the commandant. Mara sat. "You have not slept?" "No, ma'am." "Good." Adha lowered herself into the other chair slowly. The limp had gotten worse over 19 years, and regarded her for a while. "I will tell you what I am going to do, and then I will tell you what I want from you, and then you may tell me to go to the deep if you wish, and it will not be held against you. Is that acceptable?" "Yes, ma'am." "The board will find against Sub-Instructor Seval on all counts. That is not in doubt and has not been for some weeks. We are only waiting on the tampering report. He will be dismissed from the service. He will be remanded to the V-Harn home courts, and they will find Keshthal asterisk, and his house will strike his name, and his crest will be ground, and he will be nothing." She said all of this without any inflection at all. "He is 31 years old. He will live another 90 years. Do you understand what I am telling you?" "Yes, ma'am." "No, you do not. You are 19, and you are being kind to me." Adha tilted her crest slightly. "He will live another 90 years as a person no one is permitted to name. That is what my law does. It is a very old law, and it is a very heavy one, and I have spent 19 years on this station believing it was the finest thing my species ever made. And in the last 8 weeks I have begun to wonder whether it is only a very elaborate way of admitting that we never learned to stop." She turned her head and looked at the gray stone on the wall. "That," she said, "is from a beach on my homeworld. It is the place where the last of our clan wars ended, 900,000 dead. We ended it by inventing a sentence, I set my name against yours, and making it a crime not to say it." She looked back at Mara. 2 seconds, cadet. That is all my civilization is. 2 seconds of a man hearing his own voice. We put our entire species inside that gap, and we have been holding our breath in it ever since. "Ma'am," said Mara, "may I say something out of turn?" "I would be grateful." "It's a good law." Mara's voice was not steady, and she did not try to make it steady. "It's a asterisk good law asterisk, ma'am. It just doesn't do anything after the 2 seconds are over." Commandant Severin Adha sat very still. "Because he did step over it," Mara said. "Right, people will. That's the whole people asterisk will asterisk. And your law is beautiful right up until somebody doesn't say the words, and then it has nothing left to offer except grinding a man's head flat for 90 years. She was crying now, which she had not planned, and she kept going anyway. And mine's ugly. Mine's a room over an ice house. Mine is a woman with cold hands telling a bunch of girls that we are going to have to * live with these people, so learn to take the arm and hold it and let go. It's not noble, ma'am. It's just what you do when you can't get away from each other. The office was quiet for a long time. Tarsh turned. "What do you want from me, ma'am?" Mara said at last. "You said you'd tell me." "I want you to teach it," said Severin Adha. Mara laughed. It came out badly. "Ma'am, they won't even * spar with me." "I know." The commandant leaned back. "That is precisely the disease, and you are the only medicine in this building, and I am aware of exactly how unfair that is. They have watched you end a man in 2 seconds, and they have decided that the thing they saw was your * speed *. Her crest went back slowly. "It was not your speed. I have watched that recording 400 times, Cadet Sunday. It was the 11 seconds afterward when you knelt on the back of a man who had tried to kill you and held his blade at the ceiling and did nothing at all *. She let that sit. Every being in this Concord saw the first 2 seconds. Nobody has seen the other 11. And until they do, that recording is going to keep making my station worse." She stood with difficulty and went to the viewport. "They will not learn it from a Viharn," she said. "We have nothing to teach on the subject. We are the ones who needed the law." She did not turn around. "Go and get some sleep, Cadet, and then come back and tell me whether you can do it, because I have 4 weeks and a very tired old man writing a syllabus, and neither of us has ever had your hands." Mara stood up and came to attention and got as far as the door. "Ma'am," she said, "the maintenance techs, the Viharn ones, they put their arms against the wall when I come down a corridor." "Yes," said Severin Adha, still facing the viewport. "They do that to me as well." 3 nights later, 4 cadets walked Orun Seval into a maintenance bay on the underside of the docking ring and closed the hatch behind them. Nobody ever established exactly how it started, which is usual. There was a rumor that Orun Seval was being transferred off station in the morning, quietly, on a Viharn courier, before the home courts convened, that he was going to be spirited home and cushioned, that the House of Seval had bought him a soft landing, that the whole thing had been a performance, and the 11 billion had been played for fools. The rumor was false. Provost Huron would demonstrate later that it had been on the boards for 9 hours before anyone acted on it, which is about how long it takes a rumor to become a reason. There were 4 of them. Dov Carrick, who had been put down 4 times in 90 seconds and had sent the clip to his brother and had spent 8 weeks watching what it did. Baron Cade, out of confinement for 6 days. 2 others whose names were eventually recorded and who were 19 and 20 years old, and who had, both of them, sat in Ring 3 that morning and watched a man cross a mat. They took him off the transit corridor between the confinement block and the docking ring at 1:30 when the ring was empty. It was not difficult. He was understanding orders not to resist any cadet, on any pretext, for any reason. Severin Adha had issued that order herself, and she would say afterward, in a voice like a closed door, that she had issued it to protect him, and that she had never once considered the shape it would take in the hands of 4 frightened boys. They walked him into Maintenance Bay 9 and dogged the hatch. Mara Sunday was 3 decks up, and she should not have known anything about it, and she would probably have slept through the whole thing. But Cadet Very Osh, of the House of Osh, who had made a habit of eating in the mess at odd hours and listening to what human cadets said when they thought no Viharn was near, had heard the words docking ring and courier and tonight, and had done the arithmetic in about a second and a half, and had run not to security, because security was 11 minutes away, and she had watched the timestamps too. She hammered on a door on the 2nd residential ring at 1:34 and said 1 sentence, and did not have to say a second. Bay 9 was cold and it was loud, because the atmospheric plant ran through it, and that is presumably why they picked it. Mara went through the hatch at a dead run and came out onto the catwalk and stopped. Below her, in the working space between two great humming exchangers, Oren Seval was on his knees. They had not beaten him. Not yet. That was what she saw first and what she held on to. Nobody had swung. He was kneeling on the deck plate because they had put him there, and his arms were down at his sides in the flat spur gesture. I am nothing. Please pass. And Dov Carrick was standing over him with a length of conduit bracket in his right hand, and he was crying. That was the part nobody ever put in the reports. Dov Carrick was crying so hard he could barely see. He was going to go asterisk, Dov was saying, over and over. He was going to get on a ship and go. He isn't, said Mara. 4 heads came up. She came down the ladder. She did not hurry. She had a very clear idea of what hurrying would do to that room, and so she came down the ladder at the speed of a person going to fetch something, and she stepped off onto the deck plate 8 meters away and stopped there with her hands loose at her sides. He isn't going anywhere, Dov, she said. The home courts convene in 9 days. Advocate Doram told the whole board on an open feed. You could have looked it up. They're all asterisk liars. Some of them probably. She took 1 step, put it down. You don't. Dov's voice broke and came back. Mara, you don't asterisk get it. He was going to walk. He was going to walk, and you're the one. He gestured at her with the bracket, a wild, helpless motion. He tried to kill asterisk you, in front of me. I was on my asterisk knees asterisk. I was 10 meters away, and I didn't do anything. I just... And there it was. That was the whole of it, and it had been sitting in that boy's chest for 8 weeks, and it had nothing to do with justice at all. You did do something, Mara said. You sent the clip. That's not. Dov, she took another step, put it down. You held him. He was shouting now over the exchangers. You had him and you let him up, and everybody says everybody says it was mercy, and it wasn't, was it? You just didn't finish. And now nobody's going to finish, and he gets to be a asterisk story, and you get to be a asterisk poster asterisk, and I have to look at that stencil every day, and I was there. The other 3 had not moved. That was the important thing. They were watching Dov, and they were watching her, and they were waiting to find out which way the room went. And one of them, the boy from Hardrow, had his hands open and down, and had already, quietly, begun to step back. You want me to say it was mercy, said Mara. It wasn't. Dov stopped. It wasn't mercy. She kept coming, slow, 6 meters. Mercy is when you have a choice in your kind. That's not what happened on that mat. Dov, listened to me, 5 meters. I didn't let him up because I felt sorry for him. I let him up because I was asterisk finished. That's what the technique is asterisk for. You take the arm, you take the weight, you turn it, you hold it until the fight stops, and then you're done and there is nothing left to do. There's no asterisk more. 4 meters. Everybody keeps asking me how I ended it in 2 seconds. Nobody has ever once asked me how I asterisk stopped. He deserves. Probably 3 meters. So did the man who broke my aunt's wrist on the fish dock in Bright Harbor when I was 11. She put him down and held him, and she called the constable, and she set his shoulder herself while they waited, because she was the only doctor in 90 kilometers and he was going to need that arm to work. 2 meters. That's not mercy either, Dov. That's just what a asterisk town is. She stopped an arm's length from him. Give me the bracket, she said, and go to bed. I'll walk you to Huron myself in the morning, and I'll stand next to you when you say it. Dov Carrick looked at her. And then, because he was 20 years old and because he had been carrying 8 weeks of shame that had nowhere to go, and because she was standing so close and looking up at him with that terrible, workmanlike, unafraid attention, he swung. It took 1.4 seconds. It was slower than the first one, and everyone who saw it agreed it looked slower, because Dov Carrick was a big slow boy with a piece of conduit bracket, and not a Viharn officer with 900 years of blade behind his shoulder. She stepped in. She took the arm at the wrist, hooking thumb flat. She brought her forearm up inside the elbow. She turned her hips. And Dov Carrick, who massed 110 kilos, went over her and down onto the deck plate of Maintenance Bay 9, and the bracket rang away across the floor, and she went down with him, and her knee found the space between his shoulder blades and settled there. And she rolled the wrist out and turned the empty hand at the ceiling and held his head to the plate with the heel of her palm. And froze. The exchangers roared. Nobody moved. Mara Sunday knelt on the back of a human cadet in front of 2 Viharn witnesses and 2 human ones, and a man on his knees with his spurs turned to the wall, and she held, and she did not hit him, and she did not tighten the arm the extra 8 degrees, and the seconds went by. 11 of them. "I'm going to let you up now," she said. "Please don't." She let him up. Dov Carrick got as far as his hands and knees, and then he sat down on the deck plate and put his forehead on his arm and sobbed like a child. And she sat down next to him and put one hand flat between his shoulders and left it there. And very Osh, standing on the catwalk with all the light behind her, looked down into that bay at a human girl sitting on a cold deck with her hand on the back of the boy she had just put down, 8 meters from an enemy she had every right to hate, and understood completely, and for the rest of her life, that she had been watching the wrong 2 seconds since the day this began. The board's finding came down 11 days later. It ran to 400 pages and nobody read them, and the part everybody read was 90 words long. Sub-instructor Oren Seval was found to have struck a cadet without declaration. He was dismissed the service. He was remanded to the Viharn home courts on a charge of *keshthal and one of evidentiary tampering, and the home courts, in a hearing that lasted a single afternoon, found against him on both, and the House of Seval struck his name from the roll, and it was done. He was 31. He had 90 years left. Mara Sunday saw him one final time, on the boarding ramp of the Courier, at 500, because she had asked Provost Huron for 4 minutes, and Huron, after a silence of some length, had given her 6. He looked terrible. He had been shaved down to the bone by it, the crest gone dull, the second eyelid slack, a man walking around inside a body he no longer had a name for. They stood there, the ramp lights hummed. "I have nothing to say to you," Oren Seval said at last, in standard, and it was not defiance. It was simply and exactly the truth. He had nothing. That was the whole sentence. "I know, sir." "Do not call me that." "All right." He looked past her, out at the docking bay, at the great slow brown eye of Tarsh through the blast shield. And then, in a voice with nothing left in it at all, "They will ask you for the rest of your life how you beat me." "Yes," said Mara, "they already do." "What will you tell them?" She thought about it. She actually thought about it, standing on a ramp at 5 in the morning in front of the wreckage of a man, and the thought took a long time, and he waited, because he had nothing else to do with the rest of his life. "That I didn't," she said. "You lost it in the 2 seconds before you moved. Everything after that was just housekeeping." Oren Seval stood very still for a moment. Then he turned and walked up the ramp, and the hatch closed, and the Courier undocked at 5:18, and Mara Sunday went to breakfast. 4 years later, Lieutenant Mara Sunday came back to Anvil Station. She came back because she had been asked to twice by a commandant who did not ask twice for anything, and because a very old man named Bakari Endoy had written her a letter that consisted of one line: "The syllabus is fine. The teacher is 80% dead. Come home." The module was in its 4th year. It was mandatory, all species, 2nd term, and it was still called by its bureaucratic designation, close engagement, control and cessation, because Severin Adha had refused, absolutely and with real anger, to let anyone name it after a person. Everybody called it the hold anyway. Ring 3 had not changed. The mat still had a crease in it, which was ridiculous. They had resurfaced it twice. She stood at the front with 31 first-years in gray, barefoot, and half of them could not look at her, and she thought, well, that hasn't changed either. She played the recording. She played it every year on the first day, and she played the whole thing, all of it, from the beginning, from the moment a 19-year-old girl said no, sir, and a man stood absolutely still with a decision in his mouth. She played it at full speed once. Then she played it again at 1/10. And then she did the thing that always broke the room, which was to let it keep running past the throw, past the impact, past the frame on all the posters, and to leave it running in silence for the 11 seconds in which nothing happened at all. 11 seconds is a very long time to watch nothing happen. When it was over, a V-Harn cadet in the second rank put up her hand. They always did. It was always a V-Harn, and it was always this question, and Mara Sunday had been waiting 4 years for a class in which it was not. Ma'am, how did you finish it in seconds? And Lieutenant Sunday looked at 31 faces, human, V-Harn, Sethi, one enormous patient Dothel at the back who had to sit down to fit under the lights, and she gave the answer that would eventually be carved on the lintel of the hall, in standard and in V-Harn, in letters the height of a hand. I didn't, she said. He finished it. He finished it in the 2 seconds before he moved, when he had a word in his mouth and he swallowed it. I only ended it, and ending things is easy. Every one of you can be taught to end a fight by the middle of next term. It takes about 11 weeks. She stepped back and put her hands behind her. Learning to stop *1 takes the rest of your life, and it is the only thing in this room that is actually hard, and it is the entire reason you are here. They tell the story wrong, she said. They always tell you it was 2 seconds. It was never 2 seconds. It was 2 seconds and then 11. And the 11 are what you're going to be. The room was silent. Then she rolled her shoulders and stepped onto the crease in the mat, and said, in exactly the voice her Aunt Ruth had used in a cold room over an ice house on a world 11 light-years away. Right on your feet. You are going to have to live with the person you fight.